But first, let's turn to the potential impact of a second Trump presidency here in Canada. One of Trump's biggest campaign promises was to impose a minimum 10% tariff on all imports entering the U.S. The Chamber of Commerce in this country pegged the annual cost of a tariff like that to our economy at $30 billion. And take a look at this. Canada is the largest source of U.S. energy imports, with almost all Canadian crude oil exports heading to our southern neighbor in 2023. So will our energy exports be spared? And how is the Canadian government approaching talks with Trump's team? Jonathan Wilkinson is the federal energy minister and sits on the recently reformed, I guess you could say, Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
Don't worry, we're not going to talk about RFK Jr. I'm going to start on the subject. I'm going to start on the subject of those tariffs, and I wanted to ask you point blank if there have been any conversations you've been engaged in or your cabinet colleagues have been engaged on about oil and gas exports heading from Canada to the U.S. being exempt from this threat of a tariff.
Well, actually, we've certainly talked about it internally. I think it'd be surprising to people if we hadn't talked about it internally. And increasingly, there are conversations that are happening and will be happening with folks in the Trump universe. At the end of the day, certainly the idea of tariffs on Canadian goods and particularly on energy, I think really probably don't make a lot of sense for Canada, but they don't make a lot of sense for the United States either. It will drive up the cost of energy in the U.S. That is not just oil and gas. That is hydroelectricity. We are a major supplier of hydroelectricity. It's also things like critical minerals, which are really important for overall energy security. So I think there's a basis for a very productive conversation with the Trump folks.
Is your view, and this may be too pedantic of a way of describing it, but is your view that things like oil and gas or critical minerals, especially given Trump's posture toward China, amount to leverage for Canada in this fight against the proposition of a 10% across the board tariff?
Well, I don't know if I would describe it as leverage, but I think what I would say is it's really important for both Canada and the United States that we are energy secure. And that means that we actually need to collaborate. We need to work together. It is not just in the interests of the United States in terms of what it imports from Canada, but Canada also imports important energy products from the United States. That's true of biofuels. It's true in Eastern Canada of oil. In some cases, it's actually true of hydroelectricity. So we are bound together in terms of how we deal with energy. And I think we want to continue to do that. It is in both of our interests, both in terms of ensuring low costs and affordability, which was a big issue in the campaign that President-elect Trump ran. But it's also just really important in the context of ensuring that we are energy secure.
The one area that it would appear, though, that does involve energy, but involves a lot more, that your government and their incoming administration will not be congruent on is policies around climate. And in particular, the edict that Mr. Trump, used many times on the campaign trail, drill, baby, drill. I wonder, given Trump's posture, his promise to roll back many climate initiatives, for example, embarked on by President Biden, if there is any thought to revisiting your government's own set of climate policies and the veracity with which they're being applied.
Well, I guess I would say a few things to that. I mean, certainly there are going to be issues on which we have a different perspective than the government of the United States. That was true with the Biden administration. I'm sure it will be true with the Trump administration. One of those is likely the amount to which we focus on the climate issue. But I would say, look, from my perspective, Vassy, climate change is a science issue. It shouldn't really be a political or a partisan issue. We do need to make strides in order to reduce carbon emissions if we're going to leave a habitable world for our children. But we need to be smart about how we do that. We need to put in place policies that are actually going to be affordable and that are actually going to enhance Canadian competitiveness over the long term. And that's what we think the climate policies that we are putting into place in this country are doing. I would also say that, we worked with President Trump and his administration previously when he was there for the first time. But it's not true to say the United States is monolithic. There are many, many states that actually have very aggressive and active climate policies, starting with California, which is 10% of the American population.
It's true about California, but I think that there is some weight given to the policies that are pursued at the federal level. And for example, when you cite Canada's relative competitiveness. Another one of your former cabinet colleagues, former Finance Minister Bill Morneau, spoke to me last week and identified the policy that you've just, put draft regulations out on, the cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector, as something that will impact Canada's relative competitiveness with the U.S. in a negative way, and particularly could also strike a negative tone when it comes to that feature of energy security that you just referenced. I'm going to play that clip for you and get your reaction.
We're going to need to think about, whether we focus on energy security in a way that makes us clearly an important part of the U.S. sector that way. And that means we have to ask ourselves, is it really the right time for caps on emissions? So these are hard policy choices. I think they're the right things to be putting on the table to think about now. It's not only about having great relationships, it's also about the substance of what we're actually going to do to be a good partner to the United States.
Mr. Morneau is the furthest thing from a climate change denier. Is it worth considering a pause on that emissions cap?
Well, I certainly agree with Mr. Morneau in the context of it's important for us to actually have a partnership with the Americans on energy. We are so inextricably tied that it is very important for both sides of the border that we actually continue to have a very thoughtful and productive relationship as we have in the past. Where I would disagree with Minister Morneau, and I know him well, and he and I were friends, or are friends, is I would suggest that he actually have a look at what the cap is, and I'm not sure that he fully understands or appreciates that. At the end of the day, the cap is actually about driving down emissions in the oil and gas sector. It's not a cap on production, and in fact, we actually foresee production growing significantly in Canada between now and 2030. It is about doing its part as a sector to reduce carbon emissions, but it's also about enhancing its competitiveness on a long-term basis in a world that is moving towards a lower carbon future. And it's not just the government, it's also the industry. I mean, the Pathways organization exists because they recognize that to access capital and increasingly to be able to sell their products, they're going to have to be able to talk about the ways in which they've reduced their carbon footprint. So, I would just say, with due respect to Minister Morneau on this issue, he's just wrong.
I take your point on the industry, except for you had them about a year ago. They were in agreement that, maybe there's a way to do this, particularly with the use of carbon capture technology, in which it wouldn't stifle production. But they seem to have taken a different view since you introduced these regulations, these draft regulations on November 4th. There is a consensus view emerging from the oil patch itself and the provinces which house those resources that this would amount in the long term to a production cap. I take your point on, again, you use the word long term, aligning ourselves with the transition to a different economy in the long term. Donald Trump is talking about something very different, and the U.S. still plays a big role in the way things go in the medium to short term. So how much pain are you willing to endure and willing to let Canadians endure in the mid to short term for what you see as an objective a long time away?
Well, I'm not, absolutely not, and we will not be subjecting the sector nor Canadians in any way to that. And in fact, we will be enhancing the economic activity in this country. I mean, there will be tens of thousands of jobs that are going to be created by carbon capture projects, and the projects like Dow's net zero petrochemical facility and the low carbon hydrogen facilities that we're already seeing being built in Alberta. So absolutely, the focus for us is on being able to move forward in a manner that is thoughtful. Mr. Trump can say, what he thinks in terms of drill, baby, drill. But at the end of the day, the demand for oil on a global basis is what is actually going to tell the tale in terms of what gets produced. And you will know, Vassy, that the majority of oil is actually used as a transportation application. We're seeing, the very rapid deployment of electric vehicles in most countries around the world. And I would say one shouldn't preclude that continuing in the United States, with Elon Musk being a key member of the cabinet there, but certainly in China, in Japan, in South Korea, in Europe. So at the end of the day, this is about competitiveness and it's about affordability.
But I guess that's the vein in which I'm asking that, because even when you point to, for example, the transition to EVs, and 6 months ago, I would have, it would have been hard to disagree. Think about the mandates that were in place in the United States, the tax incentives that were there. Trump today is saying that he's going to remove those, despite Elon Musk now forming a central part of his cabinet. So again, are you attached dogmatically to this idea of a cap because of your posture around climate change? And is it at the expense of maybe what pragmatically might make more sense in the short term vis-a-vis what's happening with Trump and the relative position we'll find ourselves in?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me start where you started, which is, interestingly enough, if you actually look at electric vehicles, increasingly you don't need the subsidies. Like, electric vehicles are being produced now in China for less costs on a capital basis than an internal combustion engine. And overall, what you're seeing is tens of thousands of dollars in savings on a life cycle basis from driving an electric vehicle versus driving a gasoline-powered car. That is something that we're seeing in technologies across the piece, and it's actually the fight against climate change that's helping us to actually reduce the costs of energy that are used by consumers everywhere. So at the end of the day, it's not about adding costs. It's about, yes, it's about fighting climate change. I mean, that hasn't gone away. It's an existential threat to the future of the human race. Anybody who says that climate change is important or you can actually push it off for 20 years doesn't understand it and should go and read a textbook. But
does that include Donald Trump?
No, that includes folks like what you're saying with respect to the oil and gas sector. Like, you can't just push off action for 20 years and say that that somehow we can come back to it at a later date. But you have to be thoughtful about how you do it. We have tried to be very thoughtful to ensure that this can be done in a way that's affordable for industry, that will actually generate long-term benefits and savings for consumers. That's true of EVs. That's true of heat pumps in place of oil, and in many places in place of gas. That's true across the board increasingly. It's true of renewable electricity, which is now the lowest cost way to generate electricity. So I would just challenge the presupposition that you are, the position that you sort of are articulating. It's just not based on fact.
Except for, we have a president now who is saying all the things that you just described, he's going to work adamantly to reverse. And it's not just some tiny little country a couple continents away. It's the biggest economy in the entire world.
Well, I'm not sure that President Trump has said he's going to work to reverse that. What he's saying is he's going to take out some of the regulatory tools and perhaps some of the subsidies. But as I say to you, increasingly,
he's getting rid of the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the biggest climate plan the U.S. has ever put forward. He said he will end it completely.
Well, I think we should give President Trump some time to actually come into power and decide what he's going to do. I mean, a lot of the funding that has actually gone into large-scale manufacturing in the United States has gone into the South, into Republican states. So I think with due respect, we need to give President Trump some time to actually decide which pieces of it he may keep and which pieces of it he may not. But actually, I will just tell you, like, from a technology perspective, increasingly, those technologies that are actually lower emission are actually lower cost. When President Trump was in power the last time, coal-fired power plants went down significantly in terms of what they produced, and it's because renewables were way more cost-effective. That's what we're seeing in EVs. That's what we're seeing in heat pumps. That's what we're seeing largely across the board. So, I am quite optimistic that the market is actually going to move us in this direction.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. I appreciate the conversation as always. Thank you, Minister.
All right, nice to see you, Vassy.